Hello, this is Nathaniel James, and this is the fourth installment of Philanthropy Geek Exchange, where we'll talk to some of the most effective innovators in the field of philanthropy. Today, we're joined by Suki O'Kane of the Walter and Elise Haas Foundation, and she's going to talk to us about the current state of open data and philanthropy, specifically a new tool that she and some collaborators have been putting together to make the adoption for open data easier in the field of philanthropy and for foundations. So welcome, Suki.
Thanks a lot. Glad to be here.
So let's assume that open data is a new or still potentially intimidating buzzword for a professional in philanthropy. What is open data, briefly and concisely, and what is the value of open data to the field of philanthropy?
I've heard a lot of definitions of open data, and it's almost annoying what the buzzword is right now because we're not exactly sure. So the approach that we take at the Haas Fund is that it's any learning that we have that we can kind of compartmentalize and share with others and hopefully hear back from them about how they're approaching the problems. Once we see our joint data together, we can start thinking about strategic solutions. So this could be around who we're giving money to, where we're giving dough, what it's doing, who it's serving, and also any other impacts that we might want to track. And so open data or big data for us is just a way of being obvious about what we're doing in the community.
Now, just before we move on, since it is such a popular buzzword but still often misunderstood, what do you think people are having trouble with as the idea of open or big data gets around the field?
I think that for a lot of, especially in small foundations, it might be difficult to figure out what to collect, how to store it, and how to broadcast it and share it with others. So when we first started our own project to crack this nut, if you will, I wanted to have a very low threshold for involvement. I was fascinated by some of the big data standards that were going on, but we didn't have a big IT department to parse it for us, and I thought, what sort of tools could we make that an ordinary person could make and use? So we had a very simple task ahead of us of updating our website. We wanted to make our grants searchable for anybody visiting and studying whether they were a good fit for the fund. And it's right at that moment I said, hey, let's build this tool that will allow us not only to share our grants data, and while we're at it, make it machine readable, sorry to get jargony on you, make it scrapable by the rest of the web so that our colleagues and anyone else who is looking at social change could find out what we're doing.
Great. So let's get tangible around the tools that are available to the field now, and specifically wanting to talk about hGrant, which is, again, jargon, a micro format for data. So I'll ask you to talk about hGrant and then say what anyone needs to know about the idea of a micro format. And then you've been one of the lead instigators for a new Wordpress, which is a blogging and content management system, a Wordpress plugin that people can use to interface with the hGrant format and in their grant-making software. So for anyone who's listening and this seems a little intimidating, keep your arms and legs inside the vehicle, and we'll try to make it as clear as possible. So let's start with hGrant, assuming someone is excited about the idea of sharing knowledge, but maybe intimidated once things start getting into technical jargon.
It's true. If anyone looks inside their grants database, there's going to be hundreds of fields describing what's happening with a grantee and a grant. What hGrant does, it allows you to put that information out on the web without cluttering up a web page with all that information. Well, we can show that a grant went to a certain organization for a certain period of time and a certain amount to do a certain thing, 4 ideas. But in fact, underneath that web page, in the code, you're going to have everything describing that. And the hGrant format, which is held in a repository with the Foundation Center, has 80 fields to describe what that grant is, where it's from, where it's going, who gave it, and where it's going to serve. Not only where the grantee is, but where the dollars go. Geocoding, they call it. Now, the Foundation Center has some really brilliant aggregators out there that allow you to visualize this information. And we felt that the more we could pour data into systems like the foundation centers, the more we could instantly visualize where our dollars were going and how they were in play in a landscape. So that is basically the technical beauty of hGrant and micro formats, which is put a lot of information out on the web, but don't clutter my page with it. And the other good part is that it goes from very complicated grant management systems to very complicated data aggregators where the spiders are crawling over the web grabbing data for this sense for good. And then, but actually you're just sitting at your desk just announcing that you just did another round of 30 grants. It should feel that simple. We chose WordPress because it was free and open source. We didn't want any barrier for people getting into this work. We knew that we might have a little bit of cost to develop a new plugin to write code. That's why we brought in our partners, Mission Minded, and said, we'd like to write a plugin for WordPress and make it free and available to any grant maker who wants to try this stuff. And they were totally agreeing to this. We were surprised to have that relationship, but they're an incredibly forward-thinking group. And we talked to the Foundation Center and said, we want to write something that would allow, oh, I don't know, 10 times as many people to report into your hGrant or hGrant reporting systems. Now, you might know them through Foundation Center Online or Reporting Commitment or Glass Pockets, or there are other Foundation data tools, Philanthropy Insight. But this one, they said, wait, you want to write a little plugin for free that would allow thousands of grant makers to pour into our system? I go, yeah, that's it. And they said, okay, let's work together. So using the Foundation Center, Mission Minded, and with the fund, we started talking it up with our colleagues. And now we're at version 1.1 out of WordPress plugins that people can search for us, Open hGrant. And they'll see right there the tagline, the little plug-in for philanthropy's big data. That's our story.
Great. So let's unpack a little bit of that. One thing I heard you talk about is how our work is playing out in a landscape. And so I think this is really, you know, some people may say, well, you know, we know how much and where it's going to what kinds of organizations and things like that. And I think right now it's cart before the horse, and it's difficult for people to think about what it means when all of a sudden you have comparative data across foundations at scale with maybe hundreds or maybe even thousands, you know, someday maybe all 86,000 foundations out there. So can you help folks think about the qualitative difference between one foundation knowing what they know about their grant making and the field being able to scan and make comparisons across foundations and grant making organizations?
It's pretty much, you know, I think that you can have any type of grant making strategy in your organization, and you probably at some point would want to figure out what is the impact of your dollar in the community you're serving. Now, there are several indicators. Let's get employment data. Let's get educational attainment data. Let's go ahead and see what the joblessness rate is in this place that we're serving, and see if those big data sets about impact can be brought in. What I'm talking about is after you've pulled in that data, started a grant-making portfolio, push your investment out, information about your investment out, to see how it compares with your colleagues. For some grant makers, it's very critical to find out how their money relates and their investment relates to the investment of others. Who else is in that place? How can we work together? How can we collaborate, for even strictly in funding collaboration, to coordinate our investments so that we can have success in the communities? So I see this happening all the time, even without big data. I see it happening without technology. But now that we have these tools, I feel that we can have more people participate in this type of approach. It might be very easy now to answer the key question. We're thinking of going into this area of work. Who's already there? And then you connect with your colleague, make a new colleague or find a new peer, and you can learn from them as you're developing a portfolio. And if you're working with public agencies, if the independent sector is working with the public sector, they can say, all of a sudden I realize if I'm going to align this grant making, I would like to know where you guys are going and what type of data you have and why you're in this particular area doing this particular intervention. That way you can do cross-sector collaboration. I think the field is pretty understanding around collective impact. These are the sorts of appetites that we already have for doing this work, and there will always be a super complicated landscape technically for the data that we're collecting. So our tool just comes in at a very basic level that to reward any foundation that has an appetite for sharing and learning from others with a tiny little piece of technology that will make it easier for them to do.
Great. Let's talk about the tiny little piece of technology. So
Sure.
It's a WordPress plugin. So
Yeah.
first of all, does it interact with every grant management software suite that's out there, or do you have to be using a particular grant management software service? And do you need to be running a WordPress site in order to use the tool that you've provided?
Okay. Well, the good part is it's completely agnostic. You could be using Excel, or you could be using Flux, or you could be using any version of GIFs. As long as your grant-making software can produce a certain type of export called a comma-delimited file, the CSV file, which is often an option even in Excel, then you're ready to import into our plugin. Now, the other part is, you're right, WordPress only. Although when I was showing this to a group of people at the Forum of Regional Associations, that's a group of grant-making associations, they're like, why didn't you write this for Drupal? And I thought, well, today WordPress, and then we'll get some more partners. Tomorrow Drupal, and so we've been testing it with outputs from Salesforce, and I did an all-call to the Grants Managers Network and Technology Affinity Group, two really tactical groups of grant makers working in technology, to say, send me your grants data. And I was getting anywhere from 20 to 200 or to 20,000 row files from grant makers saying, these are our grants. And we were testing the plugin to see how easy is it to import something that comes from wildly different places. So we're trying to break the system right now. So far, so good. Yeah.
Great. And so if someone is running a Drupal site or some kind of custom builds, or I think there are a lot of foundations out there who don't have a website, or they have sort of a very basic storefront website that was developed potentially in the 90s. It's not especially sophisticated. It just gives their information, their basic contact information and such. Do you recommend then that they set up a really basic WordPress site, or do you see setting up like a template for how this could be a secondary website for those who aren't on WordPress and don't want to adopt WordPress just to adopt your tool?
Yeah, I've seen, if you have the IT wherewithal to say, oh, I can have a little nook that has a WordPress site in it, by all means go for it. You can go to WordPress itself and set one of those up. At a certain annual fee level, you'll be able to put plugins in there. So there's a little bit of caution for people that say, I'll just go ahead and get a quick site at WordPress and run the Open hGrant plugin. Maybe not. At the most basic level, you'll have to pay a little bit of dollars just to have the privilege of putting a plugin in. However, check out the Foundation Center. They also provide these one-page websites and beyond that give information. I don't have the URL in front of me. We can put that on later, but it's worth investigating that program since they run on WordPress. That's one of the reasons why we immediately went to them as a partner, because they can use this plugin, and however many they have right now, 500, 700 or beyond, we're going to have 1,000 foundations working with this plugin in no time. So I recommend that people check out the Foundation Center service on that one.
Great. So a couple more questions. So who are the key players right now that folks should be aware of, and maybe if they want to do more research? So you mentioned a lot about Foundation Center, but sure. I know there's a lot of folks working on it. Not hundreds of organizations, but I think there are a handful of important organizations that folks might want to look up if they're interested in this topic.
For big data, let's discuss it.
No. I'm more focused. Open data in philanthropy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, still just bringing it down a little bit.
Okay, great. Now, I think what I'm really always tracking what's happening in Markets for Good, and also tracking what's happening with the Center for Effective Philanthropy. Project Streamline continues to do really great work in this area, and the GrantCraft, which is now a project of the Foundation Center, has also just published a great primer on how to get started in foundation transparency. I think the most kind of coherent resource so far for grant makers I found at glasspockets.org. Again, a project of the Foundation Center, but it's actually a peer site where we're all able to talk to each other about what transparency means and how we're putting it, and that often is implied about our big data. There are, of course, a lot of great people talking about it right now, and the work of Lucy Bernholtz is definitely something to put on the list.
And there's an international aid transparency initiative that's happening more in the global development side.
Mm-hmm.
How does that fit into the picture when I think what we're mostly talking about right now are U.S. foundations?
That's interesting because as soon as we started developing the plugin and I was showing it to my colleagues, they've been working with larger foundations such as Hewlett, and they go, why don't we turn a little bit of code in this so as the minute that you start producing a machine readable file, start publishing your open hGrant data, it automatically goes to the IATI initiative. And that was just a kind of a groundbreaking thing. First, that we were nimble enough to say, what should this plugin be doing, and then to immediately get into that particular reporting loop is made it that much stronger. And the work of IATI is, I think, just beginning to have importance for domestic grant making right now. So there is something about how they're organizing thinking about how to categorize grants that might have an implication for us here in the U.S. too.
Great. So I thought I heard you say we'll soon see 1,000 foundations involved in hGrant or maybe using your plugin. How are we doing? What does the adoption curve look like right now?
Baby steps. I have a colleague in philanthropy that says it's 1 million baby bunny feet pushing people quietly. Now with 4 partners, we're in pilot testing right now, version 1.1. Conceivably, list off the top, that's maybe a dozen foundations. When we partner with the Foundation Center, it's possible with their group that we could then add another 500 to 700. And the rest is talking with the community and appearing in forums such as this in order to attract people to give us a call, check out the plugin, because we're small enough now that you can actually pick up the phone and talk to people about how to use it. I was in a couple calls today just like that. We're a peer network of grants professionals that are trying to do this work to help each other. So it's very grassroots.
So what do you think it'll take? What barriers need to be addressed to start getting up to that 86,000 foundation participation rate?
You know, we may find out that it's not the technology at all. The more I hang out in philanthropy and technology, the more I realize it's about intent. Once you turn the corner in your own thinking about what you're going to share and why, then the tools are there for us. But until such time that when you're ready to share and learn from others, then you can have 1 million tools and they could cost negative dollars. We could pay you to use them, and it's not going to pull off. So the trick first is the value proposition. That's probably the longest lead time, the most expensive part of this development. But once you have a group that's really willing to do it, it's surprising how easy it is. Development for this plugin was less than 100 hours. And that's nothing when you really think about it. If there's plenty of program officers that are working 100 hours this week. So I think it's kind of compelling to think that if we start the conversation about foundation transparency and the value of collaboration, then these tools will really flourish.
Great. So I'm going to ask you a version of a question I've been asking everyone in this pilot series, which is, how do you hope philanthropy will be different, maybe because specifically of the work you're doing or more broadly, in 25 years? 25
years. That's kind of a long lead time. But I am interested in how big data connections can become seamless, so that when foundations are working with the grantees, with the nonprofit sector, that we can have very fluid, two-way data streams where grantees are able to pour data up into the funder's database, and the funder is able to pour data back down to the grantee in a collaborative lesson learned. Those shared spaces between funders and grantees could become very provocative about what we're seeing and why. And to the extent that both nonprofits and funders are interested in constituent voice, I think these technologies will start giving us a whole new types of data about our impact that we aren't even collecting right yet. So I think in 25 years we might have a totally different data set to struggle with.
Great. Well, hopefully it's a struggle towards positive change and people making the field of philanthropy and its interventions and its successes and sometimes failures more visible. And so thank you. Do you have anything else you want to add before we conclude?
Well, we should let people know where to find out more about this, I suppose.
That's great. So it looks like the best place to start when it comes to the plugin is openhgrant.org. And if you want to see, an actual installation of this on the Walter and Elise Haas Fund site, that's HAASSR.org/grants, and you can get an idea of what this is really looking like when it's implemented. Any other sites that you would immediately point out to folks?
Well, I would think glasspockets.org, because they have the good rationale work right there about why we should pursue this transparency.
Okay, great. Well, Suki, thank you so much for sharing this time. There's lots of interesting things to talk about maybe in the future. The history of hGrant and open data and philanthropy, maybe challenges in the design as it evolves and as people do start to adopt it. So maybe we can have you back in a few months, or if we continue this series. But for now, thank you very much for your time and your insight and for the work you're doing.
You're welcome. Thanks for letting me be a part of this.